Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of Give Me Lemons. I'm your host, Siobhan Mondesire, and I'm coming to you from Vancouver Island in British Columbia. I wanted to start Give Me Lemons off by explaining, not just who I am, but why I wanted to start this podcast and what you can expect from the guests that are going to be on this podcast. I'll try not to share everything about me this first episode, although I am now a podcaster, so of course what I enjoy doing is talking. My hope is that each episode, our guests are going to be exploring different topics and themes about their life, and in those moments I'll be able to share who I am, and you'll learn more about me as well. But this show isn't about me. It's about the people who have stories to share. The everyday heroes that we don't see on the news or aren't going viral on our feeds. Our guests are from all walks of life: young adults with cancer, sexual assault survivors, widowers, chronic illness thrivers, all of them with their own trauma experience and learnings that they're hoping to share to help me, you, anyone who's willing to listen, navigate a life with trauma. So for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of my chaotic company, my name is Siobhan. Most people call me Chevy. My pronouns are she, they. I'm a mom, a wife, and a cancer survivor. I've been with my partner for 10 years. We have a beautiful 6-year-old son and too many pets to mention. We could do a whole episode on how pets have been a huge part of my healing journey. So shout out to my partner, my husband, who always says yes when I want to collect more animals that we can love on. We live on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and we moved here about 3 years ago from Ontario. After COVID hit, my husband and I struggled a lot with our mental health. I had undiagnosed anxiety. We were new parents to a child who had anaphylactic food allergies, diagnosed at 5 months. And we spent a lot of our life being scared in those early years. Scared to get sick, get our son sick, scared of his allergies, and people not taking his allergies seriously or understanding the severity of them. Prior to British Columbia, we lived in an area that wasn't that great. There were a million just weird things that happened at that house. We affectionately called our last home Potato Corner. And if you ever visit our new home, our Wi-Fi name is Potato Corner, and our password is the same as the grandpa from Life in Pieces. I'll leave that little tidbit. So if you're ever with us, you should know the password. I'm going to share my diagnosis story. I have shared bits and pieces of it on social media. I'm comfortable sharing it if someone asks me in person. But this is going to be public, like truly public. I'm definitely going to get emotional because although I'm in therapy and putting in the work to heal, I'm very much still broken. I'm very much still angry. I very much feel that my diagnosis is unfair. Unfair to me, unfair to my family, unfair most to my son. I was recently on one of my cancer support groups with an organization called YAC, which is Young Adult Cancer Canada. The topic of this discussion was meaning. When we discussed meaning, for me, meaning is finding the why. And when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I asked why me a lot. being alone with my thoughts, that's what I would think about. Why did this happen to me? What did I do? And I put a lot of blame on myself. When I finally came to the realization that bad things can happen for no reason at all, I was able to free myself from a lot of that guilt. Because I thought, was it because I drank alcohol or experimented with drugs or ate too much McDonald's? Why did I get cancer? I must have done it to myself. Something I did. And I think even my parents went through the why when I was diagnosed as well. I think in their minds, it was like, did we feed her something wrong as she was growing up? Was it environmental? Was it something genetic? Like, why did our daughter get cancer? When we find out the why behind something, that gives us the sense of closure. And if we can't find the why behind something, we tend to lean into, there's a reason. There's a reason for this. Don't worry. There's a silver lining. There's some lemonade. There's a rainbow at the end of this. Please don't tell me to make lemonade out of lemons. First of all, I don't like lemonade. Second of all, I don't have to find the good in the bad. And I think this is something that we try to say to comfort people who have experienced trauma. And it's actually quite dismissive to their experience to tell someone that when they're at their lowest of low, that they have to find something positive in that. And what if the shoe is on the other foot? What if something horrible happened to you and someone gave you a pat on the back and said, well, it could be worse. Or, at least you got some money out of it. Or, at least you're not dead. Like, these are things that often people who have experienced pain in their life or trauma, they hear. And it's especially something that I've heard being a cancer survivor. And I want to create a space where that societal pressure to find the good, find meaning in everything is stripped away. I want to create a space where people who have experienced pain in their life can come and have someone to sit in the darkness with them. When people are down in a hole, I want you to climb down and sit in the darkness with me. And that's what I'm trying to create. A safe place for people to sit in the darkness. My story starts many years ago. I was having discomfort, which I attributed to being chronic yeast infections. I went to 4 different doctors, including my family doctor, who had been my primary caregiver since I was 12. I tried to explain to her multiple times what I was feeling. My doctor sent me for blood work, which all came back normal. I was on top of my physicals and my PAPs. They ran tests for HPV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, any of the STIs that you can think of. They all came back negative, but my pain and discomfort continued. When I went back to my doctor, she recommended that I go on birth control to help with some of my symptoms. I declined as I was not comfortable being on hormonal birth control. Her other recommendation was to start taking anxiety medication. I remember sitting in her office crying and her telling me that I needed to get on anxiety meds. I told her that I felt a lump in my neck and I thought that my lymph nodes were swollen. She told me that it was in my head and that often people with anxiety feel like they have lumps in their throat when they're not actually there. I was overlooked, dismissed. And it didn't matter that I had a relationship with one of these doctors for more than half my life. It didn't matter that some of the other doctors that I went to were primary caregivers for my husband and his family, or no one listened to me. I was dismissed as being crazy and dramatic. I got called a hypochondriac, that there was something always wrong with me. I was always complaining about being too tired, or being in pain, or being uncomfortable, or just not feeling right. Eventually, I believed everyone. I stopped going to doctors because I knew the answers I was going to get. I knew I was going to be told I was overweight, that I didn't eat right, that it was just in my head, that it's my anxiety. This is just the way my body is, and I have to get used to it. That it's an STI from my partner. That there was nothing wrong. I just lived with the symptoms and didn't want to waste the time of the medical professionals who were dismissing me over and over again. Isn't that crazy that we think by going to the doctor that we're a burden, that we're making someone's life more difficult? They get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to give us 10 minutes of their time. And I'm scared to ask follow-up questions because I don't want to be annoying. I went to a lot of doctors who convinced me not to trust my body. Convinced me that my symptoms and what I was feeling was in my head. For a long time, I felt a lot of resentment. I was mad at the doctors. Mad because they didn't take me seriously. Mad because the signs were all there, but because doctors choose to compartmentalize our symptoms and treat them separately instead of looking at a full picture, I was overlooked, dismissed. So when we moved to British Columbia in 2022, we were here for about 8 months, and I still had all my symptoms. I was still having my issues, but we had decided that we really did want to have another child. We had been trying for the last 4 years. Nothing was happening. Unfortunately, on Vancouver Island, in the town that we live in, there is a 2-year wait to get a doctor. 2 years. We were on the wait list, but my symptoms were getting progressively worse. So my partner suggested that I call TELUS Health. So I booked an appointment with TELUS Health, and a week later I had a virtual call. I explained my symptoms to the doctor, and she immediately said, let's book you in for a PAP, and let's book you for an ultrasound. So I went to a women's clinic. It's January 25th, 2023. I get my PAP, and as it's happening, the doctor's telling me about how much bleeding there is. She said she's unsure if the sample will work because of all the bleeding, but she'll send it in anyways. A few days later, I go for an ultrasound. The tech is doing the ultrasound, there's some bleeding, and then the tech and someone else come into the room, look at the screen, leave the room. The door is partly open. I'm sitting in the dark, my underwear down, my legs up, and I can hear them. I can hear them say, "What is it?" And that's all I can hear. They come back in the room and tell me that the exam is complete and that the doctor will call with my results. About a week later, I get a phone call for the women's clinic, and the doctor says, your PAP test came back, and so did your ultrasound results. She said there's no signs of cancer in the PAP, and it looks like the lump on your cervix is a fibroid, a benign fibroid. No signs of cancer. She says, when are you meeting with the gynecologist? I said, tomorrow. She said, great. We get off the phone, and my family and I celebrate. Celebrate because we're so relieved that there's nothing worse wrong with me. The next day I go to the gynecologist, and I remember sitting on the chair in my gray tights, a green corduroy button-down shirt, my hands in my laps, fiddling with my fingers. The doctor walks in and he says, what did the other doctor tell you about your result? I said, she told me that I have a fibroid growing out of my cervix and it's not cancerous. He said, what about the other mass? I said, what mass? He said, the 8-centimeter mass growing out of your cervix. What did she say about that? And I said, she didn't say anything about that. The doctor sits down and says, there's a really strong chance that this is cancer and not a good one. He said that there's a very good chance that this is a soft tissue sarcoma, which is a rare cancer that can develop in the bones and soft tissues like fat, muscle, blood vessels, nerves, deep skin tissue, and fibrous tissue. He said this is a 1 in 1,000 type of case. He's only ever seen one in his entire life. I left the doctor's office, walked out to the car where my son and husband were waiting for me, and sobbed. I called my parents, and I don't remember what happened after that. I really don't. 5 months later, after multiple biopsies, I was officially diagnosed with stage 4 follicular non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a slow-growing incurable cancer. Primary lymphomas of the uterine cervix are rare, accounting for 0.5 to 1% of all extranodal non-Hodgkin's lymphomas. If I see any comments about, oh, I got the good cancer, I'm fucking calling you out straight up on this podcast, so don't do it. There's no such thing as good cancer. And having good cancer kind of is subjective. I can tell you right now, having an incurable cancer, would I want to bet on having a more aggressive cancer that has a cure or a less aggressive cancer that I'll have forever? I don't know. Those both sound super shitty to me. Both have the opportunity to live a completely normal life after a first diagnosis. Neither of them are guaranteed. There is no good cancer. All cancer fucks you up, physically and mentally, especially when you're diagnosed as a young adult. My cancer is the cancer of the oldies. The average age of someone diagnosed with follicular non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is 65 years old. On average, people live 10 to 20 years with follicular non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. When my doctor told me this, she said, I know decades is not a long time when you're 33. No, it's not. Dying at 50 is not a long life. Sorry. I'm not accepting that. If I was 65 and diagnosed and told that I had 20 years to live, that's 85. Of course, dying sucks. We don't know that. We assume that. We assume dying sucks. But dying at 85 and dying at 20, 30, 40, or 50 is very different. I want to live to see my son graduate high school, hopefully become a scientist, specifically a marine biologist who studies sharks. I want to see him get married if he chooses that, have children if he chooses that, have a beautiful life. I want to take my grandkids on vacation. Mother, if you're listening to this, start booking Disneyland. My life changed dramatically when I got pregnant, for the best. My son is my greatest accomplishment, the love of my life. He is my heart walking around Earth. And when I got pregnant, as most people do, you make a lot of changes because my baby was the most important thing. But what happens when you stop using those unhealthy coping mechanisms is you are filled with a flood of emotion. You start to feel all the things you haven't been feeling, that you've been masking and covering up and managing in unhealthy ways. And my mental health struggled a lot. I was so anxious and terrified. And that was compounded by a pretty traumatic birth experience. I was in active labor for 24 hours. Things were not just progressing the way they needed to be, and I needed an emergency C-section because my son's heart rate was dropping. I had the C-section, lost double the amount of blood that you're supposed to lose. I remember laying on the table, terrified. I was shaking and cold, and I remember I was starting to fall asleep. And I just said to myself over and over again in my head, do not fall asleep. If you fall asleep, you're going to die and you'll never meet him. When I was finally calmed down, they brought him over. And the moment I looked at him, I knew he was mine. I knew who he was. And my whole life changed. Post C-section, I ended up developing a pretty rare infection and had to go to the hospital. I had a 7-centimeter mass in my abdomen that was just an infection, a pocket of infection. They had to drain it, and for a month, I was on IV antibiotics through a PICC line every day, every 24 hours. I also had to go for wound packing every day. I could barely walk. I couldn't pick up my son. My partner would have to help me, carry me to bed. I couldn't do anything. And on top of that, I had undiagnosed anxiety and undiagnosed cancer. Things started to get better for us after I was able to heal from my C-section. But mentally, I continued to struggle. And the first couple years of our son's life were really hard for me. And I pushed a lot of people away in my life because of my anxiety. I didn't give grandparents the opportunity they deserve to connect and bond with my son when he was small. It's much better now that I'm in a better place mentally, but I was really hard on them back then. But in my brain, it made sense. I was doing what I needed to do to protect my son. Eventually, my mental health got so bad that I got an assessment done and was diagnosed with generalized anxiety, OCD, other stress and trauma-related anxiety, social anxiety, and a death phobia. Which, I have to say, being diagnosed with a death phobia and then getting cancer is the most cruelly ironic thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Getting cancer, I guess, was the best exposure therapy someone could get because I don't think I have a death anxiety anymore. I have a lot I want to accomplish in this life. I had a lot before cancer I wanted to accomplish, but it was very tunnel focused on career. I wanted to be a CMO. I had amounts of money that I wanted to make. I had titles by certain ages. I remember I was determined to be a director by the time I was 30, and I was. I was determined to be a VP by the time I was 32, and I was. And I was determined to be a CMO by the time I was 36. That's not my plan anymore. Mostly because the role of CMO is becoming obsolete, and we're really seeing that pivot into a chief revenue officer. I have different plans now. Someone once said on one of our cancer support group chats, to live a life worth dying from. And that resonated with me so much. I want to live a life worth dying from. And so when I was diagnosed, I started a bucket list on my phone. And I want to read some of it to you. And some of them I've already done. Some of them I haven't. But I'm going to read some to you. So maybe you can help me achieve some of these. I want to swim with bioluminescent algae. I want to swim with whale sharks, learn sign language, visit the Galapagos Islands, pet a Highland cow, go to Alaska. By the end of this year, I want to take my son to Australia. I want to cage dive with great white sharks, go skydiving, take my son to a concert, run a half marathon and a marathon, go to Salem, Massachusetts, go on a safari, write a book, and one that I finally get to check off my list, start a podcast. So I'm going to check that off right now. The difficulty with having a podcast that speaks to trauma is that I have to be able to speak about my trauma. And I think I've done really amazing work healing, going through the stages of grief, and getting to a point of acceptance. But I think if I'm being honest with myself, I haven't gone through all of those stages. I think this podcast is my 7th stage. I think this is how I'm processing my grief. To help others who are listening work through their trauma. That might be what they mean by when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. It's not. I just Googled it. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade is a proverbial phrase used to encourage optimism and positive can-do attitude in the face of adversity or misfortune. Lemons suggest sourness or difficulty in life. Making lemonade is turning them into something positive or desirable. Fuck that. When is cancer ever fucking desirable? Being a cancer survivor has connected me in ways I never really thought possible to other people. And these are people who have moved through life with trauma, who have navigated trauma. I want to validate my guests and their experiences. I want to validate my listeners and their experiences. Connect with the stories that are being shared. I'm so excited about our first guest who will be joining me on our next episode. Their name is Logan Petersil. They are a non-binary childhood cancer survivor and a dear friend of mine who I met through Young Adult Cancer Canada. Logan and I discuss all things related to gender identity and the intersectionality of being a cancer survivor and their identity. Be patient with me in the beginning. I'll find my groove. But I hope this was a good intro into me. I'll be ending each of my episodes by asking my guests one question. When life gives you lemons, what's one choice you can make? Because it's not about finding silver linings or making lemonade out of lemons, because everything doesn't happen for a reason. And how you live your life is your choice. So to answer my question, on the first official episode of Give Me Lemons, when life gives you lemons, make a podcast. Right, Archie?
Yeah. Thanks for listening to my mom podcast.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Siobhan Mondesire, saying, stay sour, my friends.